When we think of the absolute peak of English literature, our minds immediately go to the late 1500s. We picture the thriving world of Shakespeare and Spenser, a culture exploding with theatrical brilliance and complex poetry. But that explosion of creativity did not happen by spontaneous magic. If you rewind the clock earlier, you hit a massive 150-year stretch where almost nothing of consequence was written. That long drought kicked off precisely in the year 1400, following the death of Geoffrey Chaucer. As the only true master of his age, his passing left English storytelling completely hollowed out. Starting in 1400, new ideas failed to grow. Wars and religious purges forced reformists into hiding. Universities flatlined, wasting energy on dry medieval philosophies. Meanwhile, writers endlessly copied Chaucer's style, trapping English poetry in a closed loop. Escaping this century-long rut demanded a total re-engineering of the English literary machine, how language was newly structured, how it was physically captured, and how it was distributed. While the wealthy, educated centers of England were completely stuck, the basic software of modern storytelling was secretly being coded on the edges of society. Up north, Scottish writers completely rejected those cheap Chaucer imitations. They stepped outside and painted from reality, documenting the exact way a barren winter landscape thaws into vibrant spring. At the same time, the English working class was developing its own underground oral tradition. Through folk songs and ballads about figures like Robin Hood, ordinary people were circulating stories filled with raw emotion and sharp social commentary. These independent movements highlighted exactly what the elite literary diet lacked. To survive, English literature desperately needed this injection of authentic observation and genuine human feeling. Before the old medieval world officially died, there was one final attempt to memorialize it. In 1470, Sir Thomas Malory gathered all the scattered, chaotic legends of King Arthur and forged them into one massive, connected prose compilation. Malory's work captured the past, but the ultimate hardware upgrade arrived from Europe. In 1476, the printing press finally hit English soil. Set up by William Caxton at Westminster, this machine entirely shattered the church's monopoly on knowledge. By shifting from slow, handwritten manuscripts to mechanical mass production, printers ensured that books could suddenly reach anyone with a few coins. This volume of production forced the famously erratic English language into a rigid shape, establishing standardized spelling and grammar for the very first time. That reliable, standardized grade of language was an absolute prerequisite. Without a consistent way to communicate across the entire country, the complex ideas of the coming Renaissance would have been impossible to share. With the press fully operational, a massive wave of intellectual freedom, the movement known as humanism, poured across the Alps and directly into English print shops. This movement pushed scholars to create foundational translated texts. Looking closely at this print of William Tyndale's translated Bible, you can see a clear, highly accessible New English prose style that ordinary citizens could easily grasp. In the early 1500s, two diplomats named Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard returned from the Italian courts carrying an entirely new literary code. This schematic outlines the two precise structural mechanics they introduced. First, the sonnet, which forces thoughts into a tight 14-line structure, and second, blank verse, a rigid 10-syllable line that completely drops the need for rhyming. Wyatt and Surrey handed the English language an exact mathematical framework. They built the rhythmic scaffolding that later playwrights would rely on to construct their greatest tragedies and comedies. All these upgrades collided in 1557. Publisher Richard Tottel released a collection of poems built entirely on Wyatt and Surrey's strict new structures. Known as Tottel's Miscellany, this single book acted as the starting gun for the Elizabethan age of literature that followed right on its heels. The century and a half between Chaucer and Shakespeare served as an active, hidden assembly line. Scottish nature poetry, working-class ballads, the mechanical printing press, and imported Italian verse structures all developed independently. When those distinct pieces of engineering finally locked together, they formed the engine that powered the Elizabethan creative explosion.